We'll be starting up here in a couple of minutes, so go ahead and log on in and get ready to go. Actually, I should go back to slide 1. We will be taking polls using pollev.com. Go to pollev.com/DavidRP or download the app. If you do this a lot, you can download the app. It's up to you. Yeah. One more minute, we'll start up. Give folks time to finish logging in after the top of the hour. We'll see if my clock is staying close to being on time. Yes, that's a picture of the Wyndham Path Bridge in the town of Wyndham. Nice little trail if you have ever been up the Wyndham. It's a nice walk. It's actually even prettier in the fall, but yeah, my fall pictures didn't come out as well. Bad luck. I need to get back up there this fall. Okay, we're going to go ahead and get started. Welcome to our webinar on grant, state aid, federal aid, essentially sources of revenue. We're going to try to go through them all quite a bit. My name is David Orr. I am the director here with the Cornell Local Roads Program. We're your New York State LTAP Center. And having a busy spring, getting ready for a whole bunch of stuff. We've got some more webinars coming up. We've got a special one on Thursday dealing with local road safety plans and some safety funds. We'll talk a little bit about those today, but even more about those on Thursday. Then we have 2 in March, one on snow and ice, which you're thinking, well, maybe we could have scheduled it before the big blizzard hit New York City, but we really want to talk about getting ready for next year. So it sounds crazy, but it's actually a good time to be thinking about it as we're coming out of the winter season. And then we're going to get ready for the spring with pavement maintenance. That'll be our last webinar for the winter season. Then we're going to be scrolling into our spring workshops. We hope to see you there. We will be talking the well-rounded roads. We're going to be moving the dates on those a little bit. We'll talk more about those in our bumper banters, so you want to join that. But the others are locked and loaded, and you can sign up. And we got good numbers coming in, but we'd like to have more. Got plenty of space in every one of them. Now, with that, if you haven't been on one of these webinars before, your settings are at the bottom of the screen. On the left is audio settings. If there's an issue with the sound, that's check down there. If not, open up your Q&A pod. The Q&A pod is where you can put in your questions. I may ask you questions and have you put them in the Q&A pod. That's the two-way side. We will also send you information via the chat pod. So open that chat pod up, and that's where we can send you a link and to the handout and a link to the polls. So you have to type those things in, and I may ask you to raise your hands now and then during the course of our hour together. Okay, there is a handout. Actually, I'm not sure that particular handout link is the right one. Let me see if I get that right. It's slightly different. So let's just, I got upstairs too late. So don't use that. Don't use that. Go to the chat pod. Look in the chat pod, and there'll be a link in there to get the handout. And the handout itself today looks a lot like this. Okay, it is essentially an outline of what we're covering, a whole bunch of resources for possible revenue sources if you're not sure about them, and then a list of all of our webinars. And remember, if it's a previous webinar, those have been recorded, and a list of what we're going to be doing this summer after the highway school. Okay, so today we are going to talk about budgets, responsibilities, because that matters in terms of what we're going to be trying to look for funds for. highway financing, sources of revenue, and then what are you going to do next? So that's our goals today. And if you're wondering, that's in Saratoga Springs. They have a whole bunch of little jockey figurines in front of the Horse Racing Hall of Fame. So let me help myself, and you can help yourself too. Who do you work for? You've already been answering this one, I hope. Yep, looks like a lot of answers here. So we have state, federal, we've got consultants, city and village, lots of county folks, town folks, quite a variety today of folks. That's actually pretty cool to see. We've even got some folks who just work for a living. That's okay. Okay. I think I've seen as good a variety. It's actually pretty good. I like it. What is your job? What do you do? Are you an administrator? You're the highway superintendent? If you're a deputy, put it in there as well. You're an engineer. I expect a lot of them because PDHs are available with this particular webinar. Planners, field crew, supervisors, board members. You do whatever the boss tells you to do. None of the above. If you put none of the above, make sure you throw it in the Q&A so I can get a sense. And remember, if you can't access the polls, you can put the answers in the Q&A so we can just get a sense of what your answers are. And again, I expected a lot of engineers today. Okay. And then where are you from? You get to click on this one. You get to click on the map. Where are you from? Okay. You know, just put a dot down and tells me where you're from. This is a New York specific kind of thing, so it's probably not going to be useful for our friends in Lake Ontario. So we'll see if they show up. Okay. Variety of folks all over the state. That's good. And there's about 120 of you on if you're not sure. Okay. Oh, we got a Pennsylvania. Now, why do we care about all this? Well, let's think about highway ownership. So obviously, center line mileage only. Half the mileage in the state is maintained or owned by towns. Actually, mostly maintained because the roads by use, but that's a different webinar and class. We have counties and cities and villages that make up the rest of the local mileage. The state has about 13% of the mileage, and this only lists the governmental bodies. It doesn't list some federal roads, the New York State Thruway, and a few things like that, which would add a little bit. There'd be a small wedge for non-governmentally owned public roads. But essentially, there's a cost to this. Now, we have data for cost per mile. We've downloaded updated data, so we'll have this available for our spring workshop on running your highway department this spring. So we'll get the updates to these data. But pre-COVID, the numbers for towns were about 14,000 per mile per year. Counties were about 35, villages about 31. Cities, not counting New York City, were about $37,000 per mile. But that's everything. You have to cover the entire gamut of what you're doing. And we know that with inflation, these numbers will have gone up, okay? Exactly how much? Again, you come to our running your highway department, we'll have some numbers by the time we roll that out, and maybe even for local roads done right towards the end of March. But the idea is it sounds like a lot until you start realizing what you have to do with all of that. And if you think about that cost per mile, it can vary quite a bit. If you get down towards New York City, there are towns down towards New York City that have $100,000 in their budget per mile, but their level of service is really, really high. If you get into really rural parts of the state, up in the Adirondacks, along the southern tier, you might only have a few $1,000s per mile to do everything. So this is going to affect what we have to worry about in terms of sources of revenue. And if we look at the highway department as a function of the entire town budget, which includes everything else the town might do, you can see that, yeah, for some towns, again, typically concentrated in more urban areas, towns are doing a lot of other activities, water, sewer, parks, all the administrative functions that towns do. And in those cases, it might be a relatively small percentage, but there's still going to be infrastructure involved. But there are parts of the state where the town budget, the highway department, is 80, 90% of the budget for that particular town. So again, something to keep in mind. So we're going to start with, I mentioned this, but I want you to tell me, when you hear highway department or public works department for a village or a city, what are their departmental responsibilities? Just list for me in here. Yep, safety is important. Maintaining roads is important. Yep. Taking care of drainage, paving, snow and ice control. Obviously, that's very important the last couple of days, especially downstate. You can start making those. Got bridges, sidewalks, signs. You could start making a list. In fact, it's a really good idea to do that for your own agency. Think about what you're responsible for. Now, most of the time we think about certain things for departments. So we think about signs, we mentioned that. We mentioned snow and ice control, we mentioned roads, we mentioned bridges. These are the typical things we can think about. And, we add in guide rail and culverts and stuff like that. But think about all the other things that a department does that've been added to the plate over time. Okay? That includes recycling, that includes parks, it might include cemeteries, water departments, picking up the garbage and recycling, mowing the town hall, maintaining the building, picking up leaves. There's even agencies who do electrical systems, who get power from the New York Power Authority, that are public entities in a lot of ways. So when we think about departmental responsibilities, yeah, we've thought about roads, but think about the other things that the department might do. And you have to pay for all of these things beyond just everything that we do with roads. Now, again, it may be in a different budget. That's a different webinar. We did a webinar on budgeting, and we'll have some, we do have a workshop on budgeting, but think about all of the other things that a town, village, county, or city, highway/DPW is going to be doing, okay? Now, in terms of transportation funding, again, these data are actually from 2022 for towns. Again, we just downloaded some new data that goes through, well, most towns it goes through 2024. A few towns are slower, but on average 2024. So we'll update these data, but you can see for towns it's about $1.4 billion across the entire state. 83% of that comes from local funding, okay? Now, if you're wondering, for villages, it's also about the same amount. Cities, it's a little less, about 70%, and counties are down about 60% for transportation funding, but counties do additional things, cities do additional things in the world of transportation above and beyond highways, including buses and transit and things like that. And if you're wondering, the Fed amount also varies quite a bit, but it's, again, a fairly small wedge. For towns, it's only about 3%, so it's a pretty small wedge to deal with. And of course, there's an effect that goes on, the old butterfly effect issue. There's an effect, a little bit of funding can go crazy. Is the total correct in the table? It's possible I got my math wrong. Yeah, it is correct. It's a rounding issue. I remember when I did this, yes. 9 plus 9 plus 1 would be 9, but it's actually a rounding issue. So it's just the nature of rounding. That's why. But there's a butterfly effect. A little bit can go a long way. So now we do an annual survey as part of the LTAP Center with the state DOT. And we ask different questions in different years. So a couple of years ago, we asked, what would people do with an extra $10,000? Okay. And so you can see there were different things that people would do with those funds. Okay. And for reasons I don't know why, because it shows up on my preview, but not on the slide. Extra 10,000, they do a little bit with some road work, do a little bit extra maintenance. That's what the big yellow wedge is. I don't know why it's not showing up, but we can write that in, roads. Okay. The road maintenance, things like that. If you had an extra 250,000, we'd even spend more on roads and more on equipment. Okay. And a little bit of money can go a long way. And maybe take a project that's just paving and add a safety feature, or take a bridge project and add a sidewalk. So a little bit of money can go a long way. And we have to think about that when we're looking at our budgets and our sources of revenue, and who's the beneficiary of those funds. So before we get into the issue of the funds part of it, who uses our roads? Who is our customer? So think about that, because that's actually a very important question we need to ask ourselves. So who is the public? It's residents, pedestrians. And we're supposed to serve everyone: traveling public, emergency vehicles, pedestrians, bicycles. We have to think about the taxpayers, commuters, trucks, visitors, freight. Each of them is going to have a different need. They may have a different concern, we'll say it that way to be polite, but the idea is we are serving everyone, and we have to balance what we're charging in taxes with what we're getting out of it, there's going to be businesses, there's going to be employees. So there's a lot of different people that we serve, and we're trying to balance all of this as we go through everything. But a well-maintained highway facility really does help a community in a lot of ways, because every one of us starts and ends our trips on local roads, and every one of us goes from point A to point B. And we have to go on some local roads and state roads and even the interstate at times, okay? So when we come back, those cost numbers, another way to think about it that actually sort of helps illustrate things is think about the cost per person. Now, there are some outliers, and I actually know why these outliers exist. Please don't worry about a single specific town. It just is just illustrative. If you see your town as having a very high cost per person per year, just realize it's partly low population and it's partly some other additional demands that are placed on that town for a variety of reasons. But if you look at it, the cost per person in an urban area is actually pretty small, even though the cost per mile is pretty high. If you look at it at a person mile standpoint, it sort of averages out. That's actually not too bad. We're not paying that much more than $1 per day for the cost of our transportation system. Would we be willing to pay, we're willing to pay $3 a day for a cup of coffee from one of our favorite coffee places. We don't even pay that, even in one of the higher cost per mile towns. And yet, that's how we get from point A to point B. That's how we get our goods and our services delivered to us. That's how we get to school. That's how we get to work. So it's really important that we have good, well-maintained roads, but that means we have to have funding, okay? So what I want to do is I want to go through our funding sources. We're going to talk a little bit about the local funding, okay? We'll obviously need to touch on and talk about state funding. There'll be federal aspects involved. There may be even some private funds that are out there that are used now and then. And of course, every agency does have the ability to borrow funds in one form or another. So I want to go through these 5 different kinds of forms and things that are tied to them, such as for state funds, CHIPS, and all of its various programs, okay? Now, in terms of the types of funds that we're going to be dealing with, remember that when we get funds, the funds might be in the form of what is known as an allocation. CHIPS is a perfect example of an allocation. Everybody gets a bit of funds from this pool, okay? That's allocated funds. You have to show you're spending it in a particular area, but that's an allocation. You don't apply for that. It's just given using some formula and then some proof that you actually spent the funds in the proper way. But there's also grants out there, and a lot of things in terms of grants to help fund specific projects. We can't completely get out of any issues we've got with budgets by just doing grants. We can't grant our way out of problems, though some towns, counties, cities, and villages are really good at getting grants, and they can get a lot of funds that way. Now, remember, if you're getting a grant, one of the things to keep in mind if you're getting a grant is that most grants have with them some form of match, okay? Now, that match might be in-kind work, might be other funds that you've got to match, but there's almost always some matching portion. The most common, for instance, you'll see on federal funds is an 80-20. The federal government provides 80%, and then there has to be a 20% from the local agency. And in some cases, New York State DOT does chip in. So you've heard of Marshall funding, 5% local, 15% state, 80% federal as a starting point. But you do have to have those matching funds when you're applying for grants. Now, again, you can take out loans, bonds, other forms of borrowed funds. Here, the thing to remember is there's a cost to borrowing money. There's interest. You have to keep that in mind. And of course, we'll talk a little bit more about that. And of course, everything is a combination. There are times when people have taken out bonds to cover the cost of the match for a grant. It can get very complicated quick. We're in 1 hour not going to get into a lot of detail, but there can be combinations where maybe you're going to be using your CHIPS funds to do work, but you've got a grant to improve the safety in a particular feature. Or you're going to be using your EWR funds to do some kind of overlay, and while you're at it, you're working on a bridge grant through Bridge New York. So there may be combinations of those funds. So let's start with local revenue, local funding. So where do towns, counties, cities, and villages get their funding? See what you come up with for a list here. Again, if you can't access the poll, you can throw it in the Q&A. Taxes. Yeah, but what kind of taxes? What kind of taxes? See what you come up with here. Everybody's typing in taxes. Because the type of taxes is important. It's not just taxes, because there's income taxes, property taxes, sales tax, highway taxes can be actually set up, fuel taxes, tourism taxes. There's tons of taxes that are out there, okay? So think about the kind of taxes people are paying, and it does then tie back to, okay, are we going to exempt people from certain taxes? And what's the burden of those taxes? Because those taxes are probably used for other activities as well. So again, think about the taxes and what we're paying them on. Are we paying it on our income? Are we paying it on our gas taxes? Are we paying it on our property? And are we charging people who are visiting the area? And then, of course, how do you track all of that? And yes, somebody actually put in the Q&A a good one. A parking meter is a form of a local revenue source. Okay, so here in the city of Ithaca, for instance, they're starting to charge for Saturday parking, and this is going to be interesting to see how that works out in terms of the balance of, do they get enough additional revenue to make up for the additional people they have to have, and the fact they have to read all the stickers on all the meters saying that there's now a charge on Saturday. So again, things that you have to balance in all kinds of activities. Now, in terms of local funding, some of the most common ones you see are the mortgage and property taxes that come out, and those are charged directly. There are sales tax. Some towns get sales tax, some do not. Some have cost sharing agreements, some do not. Just more important than anything else, make sure you know what your municipality has in the possibility of taxes. And if you want to add the taxes, you have to balance the cost of collecting those taxes, enforcing those taxes versus what you're going to get. And if you add the taxes too high, people may not want to visit the area if there's a bed/tourism tax. Okay, so everything comes into play in terms of local funding. You have to balance that. And of course, we can add other things beyond that. And you may get revenue from another municipality where you do a contract. You plow snow for somebody else, or you have a shared piece of equipment and you're getting revenue. And that can also be done in the world of trading, where you actually trade work with another agency, but generally that balances out in the course of a year, but it can spread the cost out a little bit. So let me just ask, just to raise your hands, if you get revenue from a municipality, not counting state aid. We're not talking state aid, we're talking revenue, with a contract with another municipality. Raise your hand. And ooh, that's a good one in the Q&A. Someone put traffic light cameras, the extra funds from traffic light cameras. Yeah, that can be a source of revenue. Catch people speeding through the light. Yeah. Okay, so only a few of you raised your hands, but again, these are all things to think about. Something you hear debated all the time. It's in the Syracuse news right now. It certainly happens here in Ithaca a lot because of Cornell University and Ithaca College, and that is payment in lieu of taxes, or pilot agreements. Okay, and so yes, these are all fund sources that could be used. And is that number right? A tax exempt agency paying in lieu of taxes? There's no right answer here. I really wish I'd love to be able to say, oh, it should be this, but it's not, because there's the balance of, if you don't have that nonprofit, then you don't get the engine of the economy. But if they're not paying enough, is there that balancing act back and forth? And certainly that's a debate that occurs in any college town, because there's the cost of the services of fire and police and protection and even maintaining the roads versus the amount that the agency is paying in lieu of taxes or the pilot. And then somebody put in there for the revenue from other municipalities, plowing roads is a good example. The amount of money you get in that should be enough to at least break even, but you can't turn a profit, so that's a balancing act in terms of revenue. Now, there are fees you can collect for services. People have listed a few of those, such as parking meters is a good example. Even the red light running cameras is an example of fees collected for a service, maintaining the lights. It's a little bit tricky in that, but more commonly things like garbage, utilities, sewers. Here in Ithaca, we have a tag system for the garbage. Recycling is just covered by general taxes. Everything can be on the plate. And of course, you could even have fees for licensing. Licensing is a perfectly good thing, or application fees. You know, when somebody wants to get a building permit or they need a hunting license, things like that, there can be licensing fees. Not a lot of money, but again, how much do you charge versus how much does it cost? Now you can, within a government, you can do an inter-fund transfer. But I want to just make sure a very important point, not as challenging for villages and cities because of the way budgets are set up, but for counties and towns especially. If you are trying to take money from the highway fund and use it for something else, it has to be reimbursed back to the highway fund by the end of the year. Okay, you can't take the money from a special budget, D accounts being the most common when it comes to towns and counties. You can't take those funds out and use them for something else. They have to go to highways. So it has to be reimbursed back. But you can borrow against a fund short term, or you can take from the general fund and move it over to the highway fund to cover shortfalls for one reason or another. And some municipalities do have reserve funds specifically set up to cover when we get big snowstorm events. And I can tell you right now, a lot of agencies are already having to think about how you're going to fund this particular winter because it's been such a dramatically challenging winter in certain parts of the state. Okay, so those are your local funding options. Now, of course, most of you probably already know these, but let's now talk about state funding. Okay, so again, this time, put in your sources of state aid. Okay. And chips, I figured chips would pop right up. Yep. Okay. Everybody's going to put in chips. We're going to see a lot of chips coming up. So think of something other than chips if you can. Okay. Bridge New York. Okay. That's another possibility. Okay. State does collect sales tax and shares it mostly with the counties. Okay. There's fuel taxes and things like that. Yeah. Okay. And again, if you can't access the polls, you're welcome to throw it over into the Q&A. Water Quality Improvement Program is what WQIP stands for. Okay. And if you use an acronym, by the way, make sure you type out what the acronym is as much as you can. Marshall-Shelley, which is used as a match on the bridge funds. I've already mentioned it once, but that's a way to spread the dollars out for federal aid. So it's a combination of federal and state and local to do bridge work in New York State in a lot of cases. There can be tolls. Now, those tolls might be tolls for the Thruway Authority, but that goes to the authority, but there can be other tolls, other fees that are put in. And of course, there's tons of grants. We'll talk about those, including the Transportation Alternatives Program, which someone put in the Q&A. And of course, there's a whole bunch of allocations. Remember, I mentioned the concept of allocations that are available. Okay? Now, let's go through a few other possible sources. Now, these are the allocations. Okay? Remember, allocations go to everybody based upon a formula. We can argue about what that formula should or shouldn't be, but there are essentially currently 5 programs, okay, that have funds with them that have a, I won't say a direct allocation because there's some applications for the Pave New York, but essentially these are funds through the local programs bureau. CHIPS is the one most people think about, and that essentially is allocated based upon a combination of population, centerline mileage, and the number of registered vehicles. And it varies depending on type of municipality, town, county, village, or city. Those are allocated funds, need to be spent every single year, okay? There is the Pave New York program, okay, which is, that one actually describes what you're thinking about, okay? There's Extreme Winter Recovery, which, because of the way it's set up, spend those funds first, then your CHIPS funds. If you need to, you can stretch CHIPS over a year. It's much harder to do that with EWR funds. If you are a village, a few limited towns, and I think there may be one county, I looked it up once, but not positive about that, who get funds through something called the State Touring Routes Program, okay? Those are funds provided to villages, cities, and again, a few select towns, and I think one county, if I remember correctly, for essentially maintaining a state road that's actually a village street or a city street. So for instance, here in the city of Ithaca, Route 13 is a state road through the city. 79 is a state road through the city. But the other state labeled highways are actually city streets, and there's funds provided to the city to maintain those roads. Okay? So somebody put that all the funds roll over. They roll over to an extent. Yes, every one of them rolls over some. But really they're annual allocations, so you probably should be spending them annually as much as possible. And again, the way they're structured, spend your EWRs first, just easier to roll over the others. But let me ask, raise your hand if you're in a village, a city, or you're one of those fortunate other municipalities that actually get state touring routes funds. See if anybody here gets any state touring routes funds. Only a few of you. Okay. I will tell you right now, when I look at the amount that's actually spent, the last time I looked, a lot of agencies who are getting state touring routes funds, which is a fairly new program, weren't spending them yet. So, if you get them, you need to use them as much as possible. And they're pretty much covering the same kind of things you'd get for anything else with the CHIPS program. Again, has some slightly different rules, and if we had 2 hours, we could go into those in detail. And then finally, of course, there's pay our potholes, which is not to fill potholes. Everybody says, oh, it's a pothole filling monies. No, it's monies available to do paving, really. Okay. And so while CHIPS allows you to cover some aspects of things, including even buildings and equipment, pay our potholes does not. So with all of these, make sure you read the rules, make sure you understand what the allocations have to be used for, and you have to have a receipt that shows you actually spent the funds, a canceled check, something, a proof of payment of some point to get the reimbursement, because it's a reimbursement program, okay? And do these programs allow for restriping of sharrows and bikeways? Generally, they have to have a 10-year life for most of them, okay? So that would be a 10-year life. There's some exceptions within the CHIPS program that allows for certain maintenance activities, such as chip seals, to be covered. But no, generally maintenance activities aren't covered by these, with some exceptions. These are programs that have a lifespan of 10 years, okay, mostly. They used to have some different rules, but things change over time, okay? So when we go back to sources of state aid, some of the other ones that have popped up is car registration fees, HSIP, which is actually federal dollars. We'll talk about those differences in just a minute. Got a question in the Q&A about state aid. Does state touring routes only cover state highways, for example, Route 30 in the Adirondacks, or can apply to secondary routes? There's a list, and it's available. If you look in the handout, there's a list of the roads within each municipality that are covered by the state touring routes. And you got to look for roads that have a state highway sign, but they're actually maintained by the agency. And most commonly, that's within cities and villages. There's a few towns. And as I said, last time I looked, there was one. And yes, once you get the STR, you can use it on any road. But the allocation, it's an allocation provided because you maintain state highways. That's the way to think about it. So here again, the city of Ithaca is a good example where a couple of the main state highways are state maintained and state paid for, but the rest of the system in the city of Ithaca that says Route 366, for instance, that's actually a city street, maintained, paved, and updated by the city, and they get funds to cover that. And yes, once you get the state touring routes fund, because it's an allocation, you can use it, again, following the rules, having proof of documentation, and things like that, okay? Now, I want to go through a few grant examples and make sure we're on the same page. It's pretty important to understand. As an example, Culvert, New York. This is a subset of the Bridge New York program. These are for structures that are less than 20 feet in length, okay? Those are covered through the Bridge New York program specifically with state funds, okay? The rules are slightly different because they're state funds as opposed to federal, which we talked about last week in the workshop on federal aid. So if you get a Culvert, New York grant, those are actually state funds. If you get a Bridge New York grant, those are federal funds, even though they're all done through the New York State Local Programs Bureau. So raise your hand if you've got a Culvert, New York grant. See how many of you got a Culvert, New York grant? So only a few of you. Now, the amount of money will vary, of course, from year to year to year. And I don't know how much we'll make the budget coming up in April. Okay. But there is quite a bit of money out there. Two things I would ask of anybody who's got culverts that they think could justify getting funds. Remember, this is replacements, things with a 10-year life and longer. Big culverts that really act like a bridge, a 17-foot span that's got a deck on top that really looks like a bridge. That's a perfect candidate for culvert New York. Every county, almost every town, and most villages probably have a structure that could qualify. Great, put in an application. The more applications that come in, the more people will understand the needs, and the better off the program will be long term. So put in that. You may not get a grant, but it's a good practice. It's a good way to get started, and then maybe you'll get to see an egret or another nice bird when you're doing the work. Now, we get grants here. We get grants above and beyond the LTAP grant that we get through the State Department of Transportation. So we get a lot of grants through the Governor's Traffic Safety Committee. This is how we pay for the work zone packages that we've done a whole bunch of times over the years. This is how we pay for the printing cost on our pocket guides and our traffic sign handbook. The Governor's Traffic Safety Committee, essentially the idea is you're trying to improve safety. The most common local agencies who take advantage of this are police departments, even some public health departments that are dealing with child safe seats situations or drunk driving campaigns, things of that ilk. But if you're looking for a possible grant, there's plenty of grants that are out there. And we'll talk about where you can go get them here in just a second. Now, there are some grants that aren't around right now. They come in, they go out. Grants do that all the time. So the Department of State here in New York had a Sustainable Winter Roads Management Pilot Program. Okay. So the towns of Canandaigua and Gorham and the city of Canandaigua got money to pay for live edge plows, spreaders on the back, tanks for doing brine, a whole bunch of different things to study how we could do a little bit better job of maintaining the road using a little less salt and chemicals. And they were able to purchase those. And a lot of people go, I want a live edge plow. Well, that particular grant right now isn't out, but it may come back. So again, it's important to understand where you might hear about a grant. And we'll do the best we can about posting these kind of things. I even keep thinking maybe we should just make a page for that kind of stuff, but we'll have to see once we get our new communications person in place on that. But there's plenty of possibilities. Department of State certainly has possible grants. There's grants through, already heard about, the WQIP program, Water Quality Improvement Program through the Department of Environmental Conservation. The Department of Health has monies that are available for helping people with walking programs, getting back and forth to school. They can even supplement other funds in some cases. New York State Parks and Recs, if you have a parking, if you have a Parks and Rec department, has grants out there available from everything from replacing lighting to helping put in ball fields. And of course, as we mentioned, a lot of agencies get to do things beyond highways. There's NYSLTAP. Now, NYSLTAP is a great one. It's a good example of one where the acronym has become what people remember. I won't make you type it in, but raise your hand if you think you know what NYSLTAP stands for. Raise your hand. I won't make you type it. And while you're raising your hand, somebody asked, where can I find about the live edge pilot? We did some write-ups, everything at the highway school. That was done a couple of years ago. The idea was looking at live edge plows, and they did show some improvements. And more people are looking at using those tools and technologies. And give us a holler, we can help you figure out. And again, you can contact the town of Canandaigua or Gorham and or the city of Canandaigua, and they can tell you a lot more about that. Okay, so I've got about 15 people raise their hands. Again, I won't make you spell it all out, but NYSLTAP stands for the New York State Energy Research and Development Authority. And they've got funds out there and available for doing all kinds of different things related to energy. And right now, obviously, energy is an issue with electricity and power stations and all that fun stuff. And so you might want to think about thinking about them. Again, the idea is there's plenty of grants. So again, you don't have to memorize any of this. What I would tell you, if you're thinking at all about getting a grant at the state level, go to this website. It's also on the handout, so you don't have to memorize any of this. go to grantsmanagement.ny.gov or just search for New York State grants, and this will pop right up on top of the thing. And you can get added to an email that every single day you'll get a list of possible grant opportunities that are available. Okay. And then, by the way, on that grant with Gorham and the other folks, Village of Victors on that grant, they said they can help you with live edge plows. Again, if you have any questions, we'd love to help you out. Live edge plows, if you think about it, is just a smaller section. Instead of having a big blade, it's a small section. They move up and down. And on roads that got manholes or odd angles, can be very useful. Better cutting, again, of the snow and ice. Okay. So there's plenty of state aid opportunities. Now let's go to federal aid. Okay, so let's see what you guys have for federal aid opportunities. See if you can. And yes, there are companies that do live action blade systems. Okay. Again, we'll talk more about live edge plows when we do snow and ice here in next week. So there's plenty of grants out there. There's FEMA, Federal Emergency Management Agency. Okay. The Federal Highway Administration has grants. Okay. LAFA. I don't know that particular acronym. That's a new one. Either spell that one out or put it in the Q&A for me. There's Bridge New York, which is administered by the New York State DOT, but it's actually federal aid. Very good. Yes. Okay. Yep. You'll notice a trend here. Most federal aid comes in the form of grants for locals. Now, the state does get an allocation. The state gets an allocation that they're able to use on the state system, and they can then resource that money back out, okay, for the local system. So, for instance, HSIP stands for Highway Safety Improvement Program. The state does get an allocation for their HSIP, and then they use some of it for the local system. But that's done through a grant for the locals, okay? And so it's mostly administered. You can get direct funds. That's possible. We'll talk more about that in just a second, okay? There are surface transportation block grants that are available, okay? Again, some of them are directly through agencies, some are not, okay? Locally administered federal aid, okay, yeah. I never think of it that particular acronym in my head, but that's okay. USDA, the U.S. Department of Agriculture, has grants. Yeah, there's actually quite a few sources out there. But again, think about what that agency is trying to do with those funds. And of course, there's the Highway Trust Fund, which then gets sent out down to the states, which is the Transportation Improvement Program. Now, in terms of funding federal aid, we could make a long list. I could make several slides list of possibilities. There is the IIJA, Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act, sometimes called the Bipartisan Infrastructure Law. I don't care what we call it. I do know, however, it's going to end this year. So they're starting to debate, how do we replace the Federal Funding Act? Okay. And you've heard old ones in the past. There's been ICE-T and the FAST Act and T21. There's lots of different bills that have come out over the years, and they love their acronyms. So just realize there will be an acronym. That's the one thing I can promise you. The only reason I like the bipartisan infrastructure law is because I can take my old friend Bill from Schoolhouse Rock and take one letter off, and now it stands for Bill. But there's tons of things out there. And within those programs, or even predating them, but reallocated additional funds, there's things like Safe Routes for All, okay, SS4A, Safe Roads and Streets for All, which doesn't quite do SS4A, but that's the acronym that's used. There's the State Transportation Plan. There's the Transportation Alternatives Program, that someone's already mentioned. And there's funds that go with that called Congestion Mitigation and Air Quality, or CMAQ. There's actually a grant out right now, and that's due March 12th, and there were some pre-webinars that you needed to have applied for. But there may be ways to get some of those funds, and you can always think about the future because it takes time to do these things. The Bridge New York program, again, those funds are available, but if it's a bridge over 20 feet through the state, that's going to be federal funds. You have to meet the federal requirements. That includes the HSIP and some of the funds we'll talk about Thursday. And I'll even talk a little bit more about them here just briefly, are actually federal funds through the HSIP program. That's the roadway departure funds. Again, I'll mention those here in just a minute, a little bit more detail. And you may come across acronyms. One of my favorites is BUILD, okay? And we'll come back, with build, but that's better utilizing investments for leveraging development, or to leverage development, build. Again, we love our acronyms. There are plenty of others out there, okay? So as, for instance, the Transportation Alternatives Program. Again, they're due March 12th. Projects ranging from $500,000 up to $7 million. It's 80% federal, 20% local. There's that match that pops up, but it can be used for all kinds of things, including planning, engineering services, right-of-way acquisition, construction inspection. Essentially, it's transportation-related projects. And the goal here is either to help non-vehicular transportation, which would mean bicycles, pedestrians, safe routes to schools, things like that, or they've mixed in the CMAQ funds, so congestion mitigation, conversion of old rail corridors into trails, things like that, turning roads into boulevards and bike lanes. Be surprised what you can include under TAP if you think about it a little bit, okay? Because there's lots of things you can do. And so federal aid projects, heck, this is just a list of 5 of 25 projects that exist in the IIJA or the bill. And just to illustrate the kind of things you might think about that are out there. Again, some of these are allocations. Most of these are grant programs, like the Rural Surface Transportation is a grant for, they call it small projects. We're talking millions of dollar projects, okay? There's reconnecting highways, which is being, communities, which is being used by the state to help with the interstate section. That's not really an interstate, getting into Buffalo, because of Kensington, and helping knit back together those communities that were cut apart. And they're going to be using that for just a portion of it, okay? Now, let me just ask, as we're thinking about all this federal aid, because remember, with any grant especially, and even with allocations, you got to make sure it's eligible, okay? So which of these would be federally eligible? Bridge replacement on a local road, new sidewalk to school, rehab of a low volume road, safety improvement in intersection, or signal replacement at the mall, and it may be more than one. Okay, it may be more than one. So how many of these might be federally eligible? Okay. And everybody's pretty much collecting bridge. Yep. Bridges, by the way, are always eligible for federal aid. Now, you may be competing with others, but they're always eligible, even on a low volume road. Okay. A new sidewalk to school, that's what TAP is for. That's what a lot of safety funds are for. If you can show safety, most safety related activities are always going to be eligible. But again, you're competing with others. So you got to keep that in mind. As for rehab of a low volume road, it'd be nice, but no, probably not. Okay. First off, again, has to have a long life. Federal aid is a little bit more restricted. You can use your state aid for it, your CHIPS funds, if you get a 10-year life for it, but your federal funds are going to be a little bit more restricted. So very unlikely for rehab. And again, you'd be competing with others. It'd be very hard to win that competition. Safety improvement in an intersection? Yeah, that's a safety improvement. So yeah, if you're improving safety, that could be turning it into a roundabout. It could be putting up a light. But as for the signal replacement at the mall, again, maybe that's something you do with private funds, where you do a private-public partnership. So keep that in mind. And remember, if you're not sure, bridges and safety always are eligible, but you have to compete. And if you're not sure, ask. Recently, a county asked about buying a road striper to put down stripes. Okay? And so they asked the state, would that be eligible for HSIP funds? The answer is, well, yes, if you make sure you cover the NOFO and you use it immediately. You're not buying it just for long term, you're buying it for now and you're keeping it for long term. It's going to have some eligibility to it. Now you're going to have to do a benefit cost analysis. You're going to have to show it's done immediately, and maybe you're not going to get the full match. That depends on how well you write the grant up. But you can always ask. It never hurts. Okay? So in terms of the Roadway Departure Safety Action Plan, it's from New York State DOT. It's specifically for local roads in this case. They put out $90 million last year. There are still $56 million available. And so there are monies available for local road safety plans and money available for roadway departure projects. Now, we don't have time in our hour to go through much detail here. If you're interested in more information on these particular grants, come talk to us on Thursday. We're going to be talking about local road safety plans for about 30 to 40 minutes, and then we're going to spend the last 20 minutes talking about this particular application to help spend the rest of that $56 million. Now, before I go and let you go on this one, though, raise your hand if your agency has a local road safety plan right now. Raise your hand. If you're not sure, that's okay. But if you don't have a local road safety plan, there's money available to develop one. And if you don't have one, it's going to be really hard to get the implementation funds. Okay? So again, something to keep in mind. And what can you do with these kind of funds? Well, some good examples of federal aid, and this is not just HSIP, it's all federal funds. Here's a case where they did a safety improvement on a town and county road system. Okay? Here's a case whereby the town of Yorktown rehabbed an old railroad station using something called the Transportation Enhancement Program. Now that program has been merged into TAP and other funds, but the idea is they took an old train station that was going to be essentially had to be torn down, and they turned it into a museum and a rest stop. Okay. Now the local match was a little higher percentage-wise, but that's okay. The Village of Green, and I did forget to put the E. I knew I was going to forget that this morning. They got money from the USDA to do improve their water system. Now that was the case where they got a $9 million grant and $11 million loans. They're going to have to pay that back, but they were able to spread those costs out to the users so that they can get new water lines in place. Okay, so if you're not sure, look for funds. There's sustainable corridor projects. There's lots of different funds that are out there for doing rail trails, road diets, road safety, bridges, things like that. I see one in the Q&A that East Greenbush applied for and approved for a project for $1.4 million. Okay? So there's funds out there, but again, you're not going to be able to grant everything out. And I wish we had more time, but again, just something to think about. I mean, how many projects have you completed at the federal aid level? If it's 0, 1, or even just 2, if you didn't come on last Thursday's workshop, make sure you watch the recordings, make sure you go to Federal Aid 101 videos, because rules change. In fact, right now there's a lot of rules that are changing quite a bit, okay? Now, if you're down in that pool, let me see how many people are in the pool deep. Get my mouse down here, scroll down. If you're in that 5 to 9, 10 plus, you're probably okay, but if it's more than a couple of years, whatever few of the rules have changed, so keep that in mind. And remember, if you're getting local federal aid, it is a reimbursement program. So you have to have the upfront funds to pay the contractor and get reimbursed by the state, or if you're getting directly from USDOT, directly from USDOT. And steps along the way, you have to get authorization first, okay? What's the chicken's name? I don't know what that chicken's name is, okay? Somebody asked what's available for a highway garage. Some of the funds from DEC and the water quality ones could be used for that. And I've seen some of the ones from the Department of State. Again, right now I don't see an active one, but there may be funds there. Okay. There are other grants out there, by the way. Again, we're running a little bit behind my timing wise, but there are other grants that people might get through private companies and things like that you might look into. And if you've gotten other grants, just put them down. Feel great. Throw them in there if you've got a couple. Yeah, water quality improvement program is one that a lot of agencies might want to look into. That's through DOC, New York Forward. Yeah. Again, we don't have time to go through a lot of them, but if you're not sure, if you're an MPO, absolutely pick up the phone, talk to your metropolitan planning organization. If you're in a regional planning and development board like the Southern Tier or Southern Tier West or Central New York, or there's one in the Catskills, go talk to them at David Orr Trust. I wish. No, I don't have my money. My uncle's got. No. Now, I do want to just touch briefly on there are other forms of ways to get revenue. You can bond things. This is the value of money. Something you should definitely think about. There is a cost to money, but certain times the bond market is good, and you can actually take advantage of that to spread the cost out. You can do leasing. You can do capital reserve funds. So keep that in mind, because if you don't, you're just taking something off the plate. I know a lot of agencies don't like bonding and leasing, but it is something you can think about. And for equipment especially, you probably want to think about a capital reserve program. And I know towns that are actually, that have to maintain bridges, that have set up a special H project, you know, capital project, where they slowly put money into it so eventually they can replace that bridge. So again, just something to think about. Now, here's a way to think about bonding, whether it's a bond, whether it's a lease, whether it's a capital reserve. Which of these would you pay for with a loan? Going out for dinner, paying for your kid's wedding, pair of work boots, utility bill, or a brand new bathroom. Again, you can pick more than one. You can pick more than one. Okay? So a brand new bathroom, yeah, you'd probably pay a loan for that. Take out a mortgage. Okay? That's a form of a loan. The wedding? It depends. I'm in the school of, well, I don't want to pick a loan out for a wedding. I'd rather have the money to help me put a new bathroom in after you get married. But that's just me. But again, you're not going to pay for dinner with a loan. You might put it on a credit card, but you're going to pay that credit card off. Your work boots, you're getting them annually. So why don't we think about the same thing when it comes to government work? Which item here would need to be financed? Again, you should be able to put in more than one. Which of these would you finance? A dump truck, chip seals, rail trail conversion, tools for the shop, or a new salt barn? Your dump truck, maybe. But if you're an agency with 10 dump trucks and you keep them on average 10 years, you're replacing one every single year. Do you really want to be borrowing that? Now, you might use the bond market. Don't get me wrong, the bond market can be used if we get into heavy financial stuff and budgets. But generally, you're not going to borrow if you've got a large number of pieces of equipment. You're going to develop a plan. You're certainly not going to do it with a chip seal. Rail to trail conversion? Maybe, but that's where a grant can maybe help you out. But if you do have to pay for it, what's the long-term cost to pay that loan back? And certainly tools for the shop is not something you would want to finance. A new salt barn? Yeah. A brand new building? Good example of something you might want to think about doing for financing. Okay? Now, bridge would be obviously a good example of that, for financing, things of that ilk. So what do you do next? Well, first, make sure you know your local funding. Okay? Make sure you understand that some aid is annual, usually through allocations. CHIPS and its related kin are good examples of this. Others are going to be part of a transportation plan. The state does prepare a strategic statewide transportation improvement plan, STIP. And those funds come a lot from federal funds, a lot from state funds, and they may include anything what's known as the National Highway System. And there's lots of competitive grants, SS4A, HSIP, Bill. There's tons of them out there. Look for those and go and seek funding. Okay? The single biggest issue, when we were setting up our federal aid class, and it came up again and again and again, was having good paperwork, and at the beginning, having a realistic time and budget. Don't shortchange yourself. Don't think, oh, if I only kept the price down, I'd be more competitive. No. A good, well-written, with a good timing and a proper budget is actually surprisingly more likely to get the funds, because usually the funds amount are enough. Ask for what you need, because otherwise you might have to pay for those later on. This particular bridge is a pedestrian bridge down at Stewart Park here in Ithaca. It's actually a pretty cool little bridge. You can make it move, but not too much. Now, in terms of the federal level, there are notices of funding opportunities that are out there through www.grants.gov. Again, you can just search federal grants or go to grants.gov. That's the federal one, and I've already mentioned the state one, grantsmanagement.ny.gov. Once you look at these things, read the notice of funding opportunities. If they have info sessions, absolutely go to them, even if they're not required. Now, obviously, if they are, you have to go, but make sure you go to the info session and then match it to your needs. Draft up a plan and budget, and then ask yourself, is there a match? Do you need to borrow money? What is the timeline? Are we talking 1, 2, 3 years to get those funds in place? Okay, and realize that a lot of these funds are tied to the type of roadway. So you need to know what kind of road you're on. Are you on a principal arterial or minor arterial, part of the National Highway System? Some funds are only available for arterials. Others can be used on collectors or higher level roads. And then, of course, there's funds available for local roads. And remember, bridges are always included And remember, if you're talking functional classification, these are the federal classifications. We're not talking about things like very low volume roads and land use. That's a road design issue, not a funding issue. So let me just ask you real quickly, we've got time for a few questions. We'll finish things up here in good shape. How can you be more competitive for grants? Not for allocations, for grants. How can you be more competitive? Poverty. Being poor, surprisingly, isn't necessarily the answer. Good, realistic timeframes. Be prepared. If you can be shovel ready for projects, that can really help you in a lot of cases. Think long term. Yep. Be proactive. Write again, write another time. Okay. Understand the whole system. Okay. So be ready for whatever the conditions are and check the details. And we're all going to make mistakes, but make sure you check the details. So for instance, here, this says no roof access, which is true. Well, there is actually away from the 4th floor, but it said the staircase only goes through floor 3, but there's a sign that says road 4. So yeah, you got to be ready. And remember, bridges and safety are always available. So what do we do? Well, first off, is the grant process worth the revenue? This is something we need to ask ourselves before you apply for federal aid. Is it worth the extra steps? If it is, go for it. Can you maintain it? Maybe change the design so you can maintain it. I've seen that happen where people did something and they forgot about the maintenance cost and it actually costs them more in the long run. And of course, think where you can go get help. You could talk to us, state DOT, different organizations within the state, talk to the county, the MPO, go get some help because it takes time to get grants. Now, I won't ask you on this one just because of time frame, but how long does it take you to get from project to construction? 1 to 2 to 3 years, but what's the timeline for a grant? Okay, that's also 1, 2, 3 years. You're not looking at grants today, you're looking at tomorrow. However, if there's an opportunity, take it. So have a plan, go get help, ask yourself if you have the finances and do you have the staff? Okay, the answer to that, and you can maintain it, you're going to go for it. With that, I'm going to steal a minute of your day. I apologize, but I just want to remind you, we do have a webinar on Thursday dealing with local road safety plans and safety funds, snow and ice and pavement maintenance. And as for the handout, you can give that handout to anybody. It'll be posted on our website along with a copy of this webinar. And we'd love you to share that with anybody. And with that, any other questions? No? Okay. Well, everybody have yourself a great day. If you're downstate and dealing with all that snow, good luck. If you're upstate, a little fluffy snow today, not too bad. Maybe we won't get some ice. That'd be good. Take care, everybody. Bye-bye.